Church, have you ever had a moment? Have you ever had a moment where you step into a room, you step into a space, and you instantly kind of get overwhelmed with that really uncomfortable feeling like you don't belong there? That's not the place for you. I remember I was 18 and I was heading off to college, 1,000 miles away from home. New place, new people, new territory, new everything. And I remember getting my class schedule, getting everything about campus and whatnot. And if you know me, you know that I'm kind of a person who, when I get a little kind of overwhelmed in a moment, get a little afraid, I tend to not read instructions. I tend not to pay attention to kind of surroundings. And so that's why sometimes a GPS is necessary for us if we're in a new place, right? But sometimes I don't really read directions or don't think about things all the way sometimes. And I just remember very first day, waking up, heading to class, and walking across campus, terrified, right? Making sure to get there early, all the good things. And I remember trying to find out where all the names for all the buildings and where they're at, trying to figure all this stuff out. And I remember, I found the right building, right? And then there's all these floors and these rooms. I remember kind of exploring around, and I'm like, I found it, great. I remember I was so happy, like, whoo, that was close. I almost made a mistake there. So I go in and I take a seat, and I'm a student. I'm somebody who loves to learn and enjoy the classroom setting. So I sit kind of near the front. I'm one of those guys, and I remember grabbing a seat and talking to those around me. And the professor walks in and he introduces himself, and I scratch my head. I'm like, man, I thought my professor was going to be a woman for this class. This is kind of interesting. Oh, maybe I got it wrong. I don't know, but we were sitting there, and he's talking through some things, some expectations. Then he begins to explain what class we're in. And instantly in that moment, I knew. And some of y'all already know what I knew in that moment. I realized that I was in completely the wrong place. Completely the wrong class, right? And I didn't want to embarrass myself, right? I didn't want to, I had people kind of, next to me. I didn't want to have that weird moment of the guy standing up in front, like, oh, excuse me, right? And the room is dead silent. People are staring at you really comfortably, right? I didn't want that moment. So I just sat there, kind of shrugged it off, pretending, it's okay, it's all right. How could this get worse, right? I remember the professor that day goes through some things in the class, syllabus and whatnot, and begins to say, hey, listen, I have some paperwork I need you all to fill out. So he begins to pass it out. And there I am in my seat, pen in hand. I'm thinking, well, I'm not really a student in this class, so I just won't fill it out, right? Well, everyone in the room, scribble, scribble, scribble. You could hear the pens and pencils writing. You know that sound? And then there's me. And all of a sudden, it's like, is there an issue? And with every bit of courage I could have that moment to not be so super embarrassed, I simply just said, yeah, I don't belong here. It's not my class. And he laughed. He said, all right, go ahead. Excuse me. Oh, that feeling of walking into a place. And man, I don't belong here. You felt that. We feel that a lot when we walk into classrooms, perhaps. We walk onto sports teams, we walk into the cafeteria, we walk into the hallway. We feel it perhaps at times when we walk into the workplace, when we're a new employee at a new job, and we're excited and we're ambitious, and we step into a new career, we step into a new workplace, and we instantly feel like the people who are around are just those that we don't seem to connect with. Man, I really feel like I don't belong here. Perhaps we feel that in our own families. We gather at family reunions, right? Or we gather for Thanksgiving dinner and everyone's around the table. And while there's smiles and while we're laughing and everything is just like you're trying to keep peace, right? There's still that sensation of, man, wow, these people are blood, but I don't feel like family with them. We even feel that sometimes in our friends groups, right? We're desperate for people just to kind of be around us. And so even we bring people into the inner circle of our life who we still feel like we don't quite belong with. It's a part of our humanity that God has ingrained in us as He made humanity in His image. It's a part of us that is seeking belonging, seeking friendship, seeking connections that we can't get through 2 taps on a screen or a swipe right or anything like that. It's a connection we can't feel even if we're on the phone with a long-distance friend who's across the country, perhaps a childhood friend that we grew up with. We can't get it quite through even all the avenues of technology, right? Even though nowadays we don't have to roll up a scroll and send it with a carrier pigeon, now there's so many modes and means of way of communicating, yet still our hearts and souls know that we're missing the connection that comes with a hug, that comes with a handshake. I mean, if you know me, you know I like to give a hug, right? And so why don't you turn to somebody and just say, hey, I like to give hugs to you, right? Just tell somebody, hey, I like to give you a hug. And maybe if you're next to your special somebody, give them a hug, right? Hey, I love you, right? There's something that comes with proximity. There's something that comes with being right face to face with each other. Something we've really realized the last couple of years. And you see, what is miraculous is that God had a very profound answer to this. A profound answer that the world had never seen before. The world had never experienced. And what's remarkable is that through Christ we get to embrace this faith and relationship with God that fills us in extraordinary ways that the world cannot. But yet what's miraculous is that through that relationship with God, we find ourselves in relationship to other people. You see, what's amazing is last week we celebrated this moment of Easter, Resurrection Sunday, where Christ raises from the dead. And then as you follow his story, he spends 40 days with humanity, just walking around, having meals with them, right? Maybe playing bingo, right? Or whatever. He's 40 days of doing life with people, showing them the scars on his hands and his feet. And then there's the moment in Acts chapter 1 we see where he says, listen, I want you all to wait. He's speaking to his disciples. He says, listen, I want you to wait in the city of Jerusalem because God is going to send his spirit to you. So go and wait. And I'm going to leave now. And so we see him ascend to heaven, and they're just standing there waiting, like, what's going on? We'll talk about that moment on Pentecost Sunday in a few weeks. But there's this moment, this 10-day waiting period between Jesus leaving and the disciples waiting for the Spirit of God to come. And then in Acts chapter 2, we see this moment where the Spirit of God falls on these people in this upper room. Peter, all the disciples, all these people, about just over 100 people in this moment are gathering, waiting for God to move, and he does. And we see this moment, right, in Acts chapter 2, where Peter gets up, clears his throat, and he speaks out on the sides of the streets to the city, and thousands of people begin to hear about this man named Jesus. Profound moment. But what's amazing is what happens after that moment. Perhaps we know what comes next, but can we pretend for a moment like we don't? In Acts chapter 2, at the very end of this portion of Peter preaching, we read this in Acts 2, verse 40. It says, with many other words he warned them. This is Peter speaking. And he pleaded with them, save yourselves from this corrupt generation. And those who accepted his message were baptized. About 3,000 were added to the number that day. These people from all different backgrounds, from different traditions, different languages, different ethnicities, hear and respond, thousands of people. Verse 42, it says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. They being 3,000 plus people. To teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe of the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to one another who had need. Every day, not sometime, not every now and then, not once a week for an hour, but every day they continued to gather in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those that were being saved. This profound moment where there's no instruction of, hey, go make a new friend. Or, hey, you're now like a family of God. No instruction from Peter of what to do next. The Spirit of God falls on his people, and all of a sudden, they act and become family. This is miraculous. No command from God. No, okay, what happens next is you're going to do this, you're going to do this. It supernaturally happens in the life of this church. As these people from completely different pasts and completely different walks of life are now all of a sudden hanging out. And all of a sudden, they're sharing meals in each other's homes. Complete strangers one minute, but now they're family the next. This is remarkable. This is remarkable. Church is born. And it wasn't a brick building with some cool glass windows and a steeple that just popped up from nowhere. Cushioned pews or metal chairs, as in our settings, didn't just all of a sudden appear from nowhere and start adding in rows towards a stage and a pulpit. Peter didn't all of a sudden say, all right, you guys are going to come with a name, a cool logo, a cool website. Get Thomas in developing. We got to make an app, right? Worship team, where you at? Come on, we got to start making some labels. All right, and can we get somebody, make sure the live stream is on? Because we got to make sure this is happening, y'all. They just were together. They just were together. And you know, I went through a list earlier about all the places we don't find belonging. And the elephant in the room, one thing I did not include that is quite obvious, is that oftentimes we gather as believers and we still feel like we don't belong. We come to church settings, we come to church gatherings, we had a youth group, and we still find it hard to connect. We still find it hard to belong. We still find it hard to create friendships that are deeper than just your name and what your job is, what grade you're in, and what you like and dislike. We find it hard. And we could spend a couple hours going through a lot of things. We could spend some time talking through the history of the world. We could spend some time talking about how humanity has radically changed over the centuries since this moment. How the way that culture views reality, how people connect, and what values and priorities exist in the heart of men and women have radically changed. We see that even in the life of generations past as we look at our children and our grandkids and our great-grandkids, or we look up the line at our great-grandparents trying to use a phone, and we're like, how does this work? Right? We see the changes over time, but yet even then, I'd be spoon-feeding us a lie if we said, that's the problem there. We gather in this place and say, you know what? Too many features and too many additives have been added on to the church. Kind of like baking bread, right? It only requires flour, a little bit of water, some yeast and some salt. Just the four basic elements to make a loaf of bread, right? And now we're all going to go home and we're going to make some bread. But there's all sorts of additives and flavors and different things that get tossed in. And the reality is we can spend a lot of time talking about how perhaps the additives have become substitutes. How we started to make discipleship content that we absorb through a screen or through a guy on stage. We can talk through how a lot of the modern shifts within the church perhaps have become substitutes for the base and the rawness of what church is meant to be. But yet again, we bring out some other things. We bring into perhaps preferences and whatnot, but we certainly cannot throw off the reality that our modern world is changing, and it's important to bring in technology and shifts and all these things, but they certainly do not replace what is the base. You see, there's something deeper. There's something deeper that even Paul begins to teach the church about. You see, in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 16, there's this moment where Paul is traveling. And you see, he goes throughout all the known world. He's planting churches. And I tell you what, as a church planter myself, I love and admire Paul, this man who was wild and just loved to plant churches and going around planting all these churches. And you see what happens is that through his life, he does all this. And then towards the end of his life, he is imprisoned in Rome, where he then writes a lot of the letters in the New Testament to all these churches and all these cities that he has started. But you see, in his journey of starting churches, in Acts chapter 16, he comes to a city named Philippi. In this city, you see, it is quite a middle-class city. It is one that doesn't have a whole lot of the Jewish culture like back in Israel, back in Jerusalem, like what he'd been kind of dealing with before. This is different. This is different. This is so much more of a kind of a Western culture with so many different idols and all these practices of life and ways of life. It was very, very mixed society, but yet still society that receives the gospel. And you see, he preaches about Jesus. People come to Christ. This profound moment. And then later on, he writes a book to them. A book that, if you're a history nerd like me, then in the 300s AD, we see how the New Testament is collectively put together, right? And so this book that we know as Philippians is put in the Bible, along with the many others that are around it. And you see this profound moment as Paul is writing this letter, as he's writing this message to his people, and it's one of his favorite places that he visited, and he speaks to them like family. It's truly incredible what he shares. But in Philippians chapter 2, his language begins to change as he's speaking to them, and he begins to say this. He says, therefore, if you have any encouragement, someone say any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, just a little bit, then make my joy complete by being like-minded. He's speaking this to the whole body. Being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one of mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, he's speaking to the church. He's speaking to the church. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. This moment as he writes these words, and he's calling this church in Philippi, calling the church even around the world as we read this now, years later, that we begin to understand that even if there's any encouragement we as individuals find in Christ, any comfort, any hope, if we even in a small sense say that we love Jesus and that we have faith in him, that listen, we must come together. We must begin to recognize that there is this selfishness within us. There's a flesh within us that if we are not mindful of or careful of, it will begin to detract what the Spirit is trying to build. Yesterday we took our kids out to the beach with family members, and we went out. We had a great time, and I remember I was playing in the sand with Mason. It was so much fun. We had all the toys. We're building this, trying to build this big castle, big sand castle. There was actually a dad next to me with his son, and right just a little older than Mason that was playing too. And I remember we're playing in the sand, and he's building a really cool, castle. And I'm like, we gotta beat that, Mason. Come on. And so we're getting all the toys, we're filling all these buckets, and we're turning the sand upside down. It was looking so cool. And then Mason would be like, dinosaur! And then go and jump on the sand castle. Like, no, we're trying to build something. And over again, I'm trying to. So they're trying to build this structure, anything. And the Mason's all like, yeah, more sand. And then dinosaur! And then he jumps on it again, right? Perhaps we need to stop watching Godzilla. But he jumps on it, right? And he's just, oh my goodness. Like, no, Mason, no. We're like, all right, fine. Let's just jump on it. Who cares? too much of the time, we allow our flesh to get in the way of what the Spirit is trying to build. We let our flesh get in the way of what the Spirit of God is trying to build. And we've seen it, we've experienced it, we've witnessed it, we've felt it. And it is painful. And perhaps even that's been one of the reasons why for many years he chose to kind of stay away from God and the church. But God is up to something, trying to create and build a Christian community that is centered around him and centered around everyone having the same heart and mind of Christ, so that when we care for each other, it looks like Jesus. I mean, could you imagine? Could you imagine what it would have been like for some of those people that very first day in Acts? Imagine being there. You're in the store, you're in the marketplace, you're shopping, you're picking up some tomatoes, you're picking up some cucumbers and whatnot, you're picking up your groceries. And could you imagine on the corner of your ear, you begin to hear this man shouting, preaching and teaching about this guy named Jesus. And so you decide to give it a listen. And so you walk over, you begin to listen. Could you imagine? You've perhaps tried to find some love, but you found betrayal. You've tried to find a place in a community to be a part of, but yet you have not. And could you imagine, in this place of loneliness and isolation, could you imagine that day with your basket of groceries, right? All of a sudden listening and saying, you know what? I want what this man is talking about. I want Christ. And could you imagine giving yourself to Jesus, and then all of a sudden someone's like, hey, you want to come over? Hey, I still got some groceries. Let's make some food. Could you imagine? Imagine how that would be. This is what he is trying to build, friends. This is what God is up to. I mean, oftentimes let the flesh get in the way of what the Spirit is trying to build among us and through us and within us and around us. It's time. It's time that we recognize that this is not about trying to suit and fill our needs. It's not trying to follow our preferences. This is not about having it our way. This is not Burger King. That was really a terrible joke. This is about seeing God's will and dream and reality come to fruition. This is not about using the community to leverage personal gain. This is not about coming in and being willing to help those who are in need, but yet having a hand up that says, you know what, I'm good, I don't need it. There are seasons we go through, right, where life is good and life is bad, and there are seasons where we need help more than others. But we all the time can't have this persona, this image saying, life is fine, life is dandy, I'm okay, I don't need you to pray for me, I don't need help. But yet we do that, we create and construct this image of ourselves that is good and loves to help people. We do it with a good heart and good intent. But yet we're unwilling to let the walls down and receive help. We're unwilling to receive prayer. We don't mind giving it. We don't mind being there when someone is crying, but when it's our turn, we want people to see this. We don't mind stepping into other people's messes, but we don't want them to step into ours or let them see it. We have to understand that it is so valuable and crucial that we cling to the things of heaven and not the things of this world and things of the earth. We go about and we champion love and acceptance, but when we begin to talk about truth, it makes us feel uncomfortable, so we push it away under the rug. Sometimes it's the other side of the spectrum where our heart and mind is lacking compassion, and so truth. And yet we don't realize we're not representing Christ well. We let our humanness get in the way of this juggling act of truth and grace and being loving and bringing conviction and seeing conviction and wanting accountability and all these things. We're in this juggling act, but yet we allow our humanness to control and dictate the way that we go, and we end up dropping it all. As when we are in the wrong, we run to grace. And when we feel like we're in the right, we run to truth. We have adopted this sense of the world that it's good to bring our of the world identity into this gathering as we champion political parties instead of championing the heaven and kingdom of God and being members of it. We also bring an identity of sin, looking for acceptance instead of wanting and hungering for the redemption of God. We bring these pillars of our truth and we embrace them more than God's truth. So much of our flesh begins to get in the way of what God is trying to build among us. We feel like we've been hurt, and so we hold on to grudges. We feel like we've been lied to, and we create stories and narratives of these lies, and we begin to paint a picture without going to the source to even know if we're right. We assume people are saying this. We assume this happened. We assume these things take place instead of going to the source. There's a reason why Jesus, in many times, gave his disciples instructions on how to handle conflict. He's like, because one day you're going to have this as people. We have to be reminded that when we love God, God's heart begins to be planted and grown within us. And the same love that he has for people, we begin to have as well. Too often we come into the place looking to bring forth us. Looking to bring forward us and ourselves. And much like what was said in Philippians chapter 2, instead bringing forth others around us. Looking to their interests. And even seeing. I mean, I know our body. I know our people. And we love to help each other. We're there for each other. But at the same time, we love to hold up our shields and keep people at a distance. Because we've been through life long enough. We know the transitions that occur. We know that we're only in and out of people's life for a season. And so when we spend our entire life like Lego blocks, where we connect with this person, then we disconnect, and we connect with this person, we disconnect, and connect with this person, what happens is the Lego blocks, the little nubs, begin to wear. They begin to wear. For those of you who have been in this church since the very beginning, there have been a lot of people who have come and gone since day one. People who we've connected with, disconnected, connected again. And sometimes when we feel that disconnection happen, there's a great amount of hesitancy within us that say, you know what, I'm just going to keep things kosher and simple and surface level because I know the joy of this, but I know the pain of this. And so I'd rather not. I'd rather not. So we gather in small groups and we gather in moments of praying for each other, and we're just like, yeah, it's all good. We gather in moments of asking people about their life, and it goes in one ear and out the other. Because we know the joy of this, but we know the pain of this. That is where Jesus steps in. And as he brings healing to the disconnection, for whatever reason, of our human relationships, he brings healing and restoration so that we can once again do this. Once again, we can trust again. We can open ourselves up again. If we have any encouragement, if we have any comfort, if we have any joy or love, if compassion of our amazing King is in us, then he wants to bring that healing So once again, we can be the family of God. It matters when we begin to say that times as we gather are important. It matters that we value Sundays. It matters that we value Wednesday nights. It matters that we value groups. It matters that we value being on mission and being in the community, being present with each other. It matters that we link arms as God is forming the church, not as a body, just to be a family, not to be a country club that sits back in their lazy boys, but to be an army that steps into the world to bring light, to bring truth, to bring redemption. So it matters that we collectively gather, we serve, we give, we tithe, we volunteer, we care for one another. So we can champion and see the world be changed. Amen.